Okay, so thank you and welcome to everyone. So yeah, let's begin in the usual way. First, just adjusting our motivation briefly, thinking that the purpose of my life is to benefit all sentient beings. And therefore, in order that I may be able to work for sentient beings in the most effective, beneficial way, I myself must first achieve the state of enlightenment, characterized by the complete abandonment of all faults of the mind, as well as the complete development of all good qualities. And therefore, I need to learn about the various paths and practices that lead to that state. And therefore, I'm going to participate today in this lecture. Okay, and then we will also okay, hold on. Sorry, it's around 67. Shoot. 1 second, I have to find it. The normal refuge prayer. Hold on. Boy. Okay, here we go. Okay, so here the refuge and take generating bodhicitta. So again, remembering the qualities of the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, and aspiring to attain those qualities within our own mental continuum. I take refuge until I'm enlightened in the Buddha, Dharma, and Supreme Assembly. By my merits of listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha to benefit transmigratory beings. I take refuge until I'm enlightened in the Buddha, Dharma, and Supreme Assembly. By my merits of listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha to benefit transmigratory beings. I take refuge until I am enlightened in the Buddha, Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By my merits of listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha to benefit transmigratory beings. Okay. So great. Now, so I have all these files to share. Okay. So just then to review, right? We are going through the various stages of the path, right? And so we were talking about these four, the root outlines in the liberation of the palm of your hand, and we went through the kind of preliminaries about the greatness of the teaching, the greatness of the author, and so forth. And now we're on the part where the students are taught in the actual instructions. And then so we're saying, then yeah, we have the first outline here, the root of the path, devotion to a spiritual guide. We're actually doing that in the next module. And then we talk about the proper training you should undertake after having relied on a spiritual guide. And so then we have these two outlines, the stimulus to take the essence of your optimal human rebirth. So that's the teachings on the precious human rebirth. And then how actually to extract the essence from the optimal human rebirth, then training the mind in the stage of the path, shared with the small scope, shared with the medium scope, and then training the mind in the great scope stages of the path. Okay. And then we're then talking about these three scopes or three capacities, and saying how that they're distinguished by their goals and the methods to attain them, right? And then this question came up at the end of last class. So this terminology about the paths shared with the small and medium scopes versus the actual paths. And so I gave you a homework assignment, and in that I mentioned this is discussed a little bit later on in the Liberation of the Palm of Your Hand. So it's on page 292, where we have this quotation, right? When we speak of the small and medium scopes, we mean training the mind in the stages of the path shared with the small and medium scopes. We do not mean training the mind in the small and medium parts of the path. Okay? So, and then when you come to a quotation like this, then do we just gloss over it and keep reading, or do we pause and say, oh, what is the point that's being made here by the author, Bongka Rinpoche? Okay, so this is why then I selected this out for, jumping ahead a little bit in the text, and then I sent out this kind of assignment for you. Please explain your own words what is meant by and the difference between quote, a practice of the middle scope and quote, a practice shared with the middle scope. Are there any practices of the middle scope that are not practices shared with the middle scope? If so, give examples. If not, why not? Okay, so we're going to flip the session on its head today. Okay, and I want to do the kind of breakout rooms first, because what happened, when I start talking, then it just keeps kind of going. And so the past couple of times, we've kind of run out of time in the breakout sessions, and then we don't have much time to then come back together and share what we've discussed and address your questions. So I want to do this first. But I also, if I just want to check, okay, did any of you then, open up a Word file and write a short essay on this question, or did you do it all mentally? If you have written something, okay, then you can send it to me with your name. I'd be, just curious about it. It's not, if you haven't done it, I'm not going to scold you. It's okay. But, I just want to know if you guys, who had done this. Okay, and then Mary Ellen, if you could please put us into breakout rooms, and then in this, okay, I want all the rooms to kind of go through this question. And then when we come back, I'm going to have a representative from the groups volunteer and present what their group thinks about this. Okay, and then we'll have more discussion, kind of hash it out a bit more. Okay, how does that sound? Good? So now let's present our findings and have a bit more interaction and discussion. So yeah, Mary Ellen, you know who is in whose group. So I think I was in group 1, but my group will go last. So
are we still missing people? Venerable Palma, who was in your group that might have dropped? You're muted.
Oh, Palma, no, I was in, we were, Mary and Palma and I were all together.
Okay, okay,
so we're all here.
Mary, James, and Palma's group can go first.
Okay, so I'll try. So we had a bit of discussion defining terms of what a practice was, and at a very high level, the practices are the same, but what we got to is the practices are different because, let's say, a specific meditation of the middle scope, the intention or the goal or the actual meditation itself is aimed at like removing samsara or the goal of the middle scope, whereas that isn't shared, that intention or goal is not shared with like the lower scope. So it's a unique meditation, even though they all have the same practices and acts at one level. But if you double click on what they're actually doing, their focusing goals are different between the scopes. How do I do Mary and Palma? Does that make sense? Any questions on that?
Do you want us to go through each group?
Let me just push a little bit up on that then. So, then the further question, can you identify something that is, only a practice of the middle scope and is not shared with the other two scopes?
I couldn't, because I thought everything's the same, but Palma, you had a good example. And
Well, you didn't say other two scopes, and so I was going from primarily the lower scope and the middle scope, but the major difference is the aim. The aim of the lower scope is simply a good rebirth. The aim of the middle scope is to get freed from samsara, to gain liberation for oneself. And that's all that's in the question is what I thought they were talking about. But the greater scope is to not only do liberation for self, but it's liberation for all beings.
Yes, that is true and well said. I see Eve is raising her hand.
I'm reluctantly raising my hand, but what I wanted to zero in on is the phrase shared with versus of. And I'm either not understanding it or I do. Does this mean when it says the practice of the middle scope, they would say, like, if the middle scope were a goal in itself and a discrete identity and a discrete entity that you would develop, then it would have its own practices. But it doesn't have its own practices. It just has, there are three different motivation levels within the Lam Rim but the whole thing is about enlightenment, which is, not the complete motivation of the middle scope. So are we just talking about of versus shared with means that I'm saying that no, there are no practices of the middle scope, if I understand it that way.
Okay.
Is it just a categorization, but is it saying then that it's the middle scope itself is just not an end all and be all? It's just
Okay.
part of the continuum?
Well, hold on here. I'm gonna go back and let's look. Right. Let's look here at this this quotation from Lam Rim, right? Liberation upon your hand. Oh, sorry. This is, when we speak of small and middle scopes, we mean training the mind in the stages of the path shared with the small and middle scopes. We do not mean training the mind in the actual small and medium parts of the path. So when I read this, it seems to be suggesting that there are actual small and medium parts of the path, but here in this context, when we speak of the small and medium scopes, we mean the path shared with. So here, this is why, trying to draw out this distinction between the actual small and medium parts of the paths, and then the shared, those parts of the path shared with small and medium scopes. So if there is this distinction, then, is there something that we can say is the actual small and medium part of the path that's not a shared part of the path, and vice versa? You see what I mean? So, based on this quotation here, this passage, it seems to me we can't say there are no, there are no actual medium scope practices.
What do you mean? Wait, what are you talking about? How could you're saying no medium scope practices that are unique to the medium scope versus the small scope?
No, I mean, Eve just said, from her understanding, there are no, actual medium scope. They're all shared.
What? No, wait, with what? The higher scope? No, there's different aims and there's different practices to come to those aims. What the heck are you talking about? I don't understand you.
This was Eve's doubt. Eve, another student on this call, she had this doubt that came up. So I'm repeating her this doubt. So actually, what you had said about these shared and different motivations is correct. So the two of us aren't in disagreement. I am, we bring up a question, we bring up a doubt, and then we sort of address that. Okay. So Eve, is that we understand?
So I'm not saying that what Palmo says wasn't the proper description of the three scopes,
Right.
but I'm trying to understand what is meant by practices shared with versus practices of. And so my understanding of that is that you might say that if there's no standalone medium scope, if it's all part of the Lam Rim and it's broken up into three different motivation levels, that's what I'm understanding. So that like you don't just go, oh, I'm gonna order medium scope, and you don't eat small scope or great scope. You just, it doesn't work that way. That's what I'm understanding.
Okay, so let's bounce this then to maybe one of the other groups. And
were you going to?
I'll give this just a shot. So I think everyone's actually kind of questioning and going in the same direction, because there are these practices that are small, practices medium, practices great, and then there are shared with, and that references the motivation, which is what Venerable Namjong and Venerable Palmo both were mentioning. And so within our group, one thing, and then I think this quote from Liberation in the Palm of our hand, someone's hands. I think the audience is Mahayanists. So I think that's, who the speaker's speaking to. Okay, so back into the group, one thing that helped me actually was to think there is never a person. There is no person of small scope. There is no person of middle scope. There is no person of great scope. There's a mental continuum. So this is how it helped me. So I was getting all confused. I'm thinking, okay, give myself 40 eons. I'm not a 3 eon girl, and I don't know why people think that's too long. But so let's say 10, 15 eons in, I'm starting to go like getting scared of the lower realms, right? And I want refuge. I want some safety. So that motivation, saying, okay, I don't want to go to lower realms, and maybe there is some refuge, and maybe there's some calling to a spiritual life. and maybe someplace where I'm not suffering terribly, small scope. So those are the practices, right? Refuge, think death and impermanence, blah, blah, blah. 20 eons in, maybe I start thinking like, wait a second, there are these upper realms, these celestial realms, and I may meditate, and then I have these higher rebirths, and then I'm a gigantic pillar of light, and it's really blissful, and it ends. I want out of samsara. So that would be the middle scope, right? And that practice, we'd be thinking about the 3 higher trainings. We'd be thinking about 12 links of dependent rising. Those practices, and some others, 4 noble truths, would be the practice of middle scope. After 37 and a half eons, I might start waking up to other people, right, Earth, right? You know me, it will take that long. That, limitless is space, and likewise limitless are sentient beings, as well as all our karma and afflictions. And everyone's going around and around, right? So maybe contemplating, samsara and wanting out, which is a practice of the middle scope, but when realizing, hey, there are all these sentient beings and most of them are way worse, in a way worse situation than I am. I mean, we're in a Dharma class, right? So at that point, contemplating renunciation with that motivation of enlightenment for the benefit of all sentient beings, I think then that would be shared with, and that's the distinction. Okay, I'm done. So I don't know what you guys think, Eve, huh? How's it feeling? You're just laughing. I don't know. I'm going to mute myself.
Dana, did you have anything?
No.
First?
I mean, we had an example of a medium scope practice. We picked renunciation, but I think we can pick any kind of practice of the medium scope. And I think we also came to the conclusion that it's determined by the motivation of the practitioner, what it actually is if you, let's say you're a hardcore Hinayana practitioner, you only care about personal liberation, arhatship, you do it, you practice it with this kind of motivation, and then let's say you complete your purpose and you achieve arhatship, then you would have to say that was just a middle scope practice, nothing else.
James? Or Sam, either? Or Shanti? I think they're the...
I was with Shanti and Venerable Namjang, so we had a really productive discussion, I think, where we kind of wound up is discussing whether or not I shouldn't say discussing because I was really just talking and we didn't have an opportunity to hear any responses, but the general thrust was just thinking through whether if the motivation is coupled to the practice, as others have been saying, then is the practice shared or different? So if the practice can be decoupled from the motivation, then yes, it's shared among the different scopes. But if the motivation matters in whether or not the practice is shared, then no, it can't be. They can't be shared because the motivations are different across the 3 scopes.
Should I put my 2 cents in too?
Yes, but if you have more than 2 cents, then don't skimp.
The practice, according to Papanka Rinpoche, is bodhicitta, which is the great scope. the first two scopes are the preliminaries that you have to engage in so that you can engage in the actual practice, which is to develop bodhicitta. So I don't know if there's a practice in the middle scope that's not shared. That I wasn't able to come to any solution on that. But when I think of it, what the practice is from wanting to get free of suffering all the way to Vajrayana practices, it's all compassion. That's the goal. So it's all bodhicitta. So all the other practices have to support that and enable it. So in that way, it's kind of like filling up a bathtub. A little of everything as you're able to, and as you do more of the initial scope and the medium scope, as that sinks from your head into your heart, then you're prepared to do the actual practice of generating bodhicitta.
Okay.
Now I'm going to mute.
I keep losing the question because there's because what I'm hearing is people are interpreting between practices and differences and motivation, and all of those things come into play. Motivation determines the aim of a practice, although the practice may be similar. The motivation would change the aim. And so it would, in a sense, it would color the practice. So I'm not sure that the question is very clear, or what you want what are you looking for as to an answer very clear. And I can't find the question anymore. I keep losing it.
Right. So I'll jump in a bit here, and what a lot of you, all of you, said some very correct things, and part of this, Venerable Palmo, part of this ambiguity, is there in the text, because right after the passage I gave you, then Pabonka Rinpoche gives this example of 3 people who are traveling from these places in Tibet. So anyway, most of you live in California, so let's update it for California, okay? And sorry for Shanti, but anyway, there's this famous highway, Pacific Coast Highway, that goes down the coast of California. So you can imagine 3 travelers from the Golden Gate Bridge, they're heading south, and then one is going to Santa Barbara. Monterey comes first, right? Then another person is going to Santa Barbara, and then someone, for whatever reason, is going to LA. Okay. So when we now talk about, there's this path analogy, right? There's a path analogy, and then there are the people who are traveling on the path. Okay. So can we say that the Pacific Coast Highway is the path to Los Angeles? Okay. Well, yes. Yes, I guess. Now, the person who's going down to Los Angeles from San Francisco, he's traveling with the other 2. And then, so all 3 of them are going to Monterey, right? But the 3 of them, they have a different motivation for traveling, right? Yes, but can we say that the person going all the way down to LA, he doesn't want to go to Monterey? Well, he doesn't make Monterey his final goal, but in order to get to Los Angeles, he needs to pass through Monterey. Okay, right? So there's this kind of analogy, but actually in these analogies that are used, they're not, strictly perfect in every way to what we're trying to do with, our practice. Because what many of you picked up on is, it's the motivation that determines the action. And so it says in the text, in the benefits of bodhicitta, that if we have a mind of bodhicitta, then even giving a small handful of food to an animal becomes a bodhisattva practice, right? So then the question for me, and what we talked about in the group, okay, someone with a motivation, let's say for complete enlightenment, when they abandon negativities, okay, what is that practice? Is that a practice shared with anyone? So here, I'll just say what I think. You see, and I think Anne brought this up, very, very correctly. The intended audience of this text was Mahayana practitioners, or at least aspiring Mahayana practitioners. So when there is this presentation of shared automatically is implying, more than one, right? There has to be more than one, otherwise, you would have it all, to yourself. So then in this Lamrim text, when they say a path shared with the small scope, that's just shorthand for saying a path that a great scope practitioner shares with a practitioner of the small scope. But there are full-fledged, small scope practitioners, right? There are full-fledged, medium scope practitioners. So Urs brought this up correctly. Someone who's only and sort of merely interested and motivated to attain personal liberation for themselves alone, they're a full-fledged, medium scope practitioner, right? So when they, with a motivation to gain mere liberation from samsara, undertake their practices, those practices are the actual practices of a medium scope person, right? So you understand? Then a person only wanting a good rebirth in the next life and then abandoning non-virtue, that is the actual path of a small scope practitioner, okay? But what is shared is, okay, what is not shared is the motivation between those three people. The first one wants a good rebirth, second one wants liberation from samsara, third one wants full enlightenment for the benefit of all sentient beings. So the motivations are not shared, but the practice of abandoning non-virtue, that is shared. Do you understand? So then when we say, okay, are there then practices that are not shared? Then on one way, we can say, and probably the easiest, least controversial, is to say the wish to gain liberation from samsara for themselves alone. Okay, that is a training that only a middle scope practitioner does. A great scope practitioner, they don't engage in that practice, right? They engage in recalling the faults of samsara, understanding the Four Noble Truths, and so forth, right? But this thought, oh, therefore I must achieve liberation for myself alone, that one they don't have, right? But in my opinion, all the other practices that are conjoined with, for example, that mere wish to achieve liberation from samsara, those are also middle scope practices that are not shared with the great scope. So anyway, and therefore you can see how that path analogy of the three travelers, how it's good to think about things, but then how and where it ultimately is not a complete in all respects, right? Okay. Anyway, I guess the point, and you know, why I wanted to do this also is this is something that I learned just early on in my experience here, when our main vehicle of learning is debate. And this probably comes up, maybe some of you had this experience, but you know, you read something, you go through it, you understand, you think you understand everything on the page, and you're like, okay, good. But then, you know, someone then questions you, and it's like, oh, huh, that's right, I hadn't thought about it. So when we now think of you know, how we study, how we approach these texts, you know, those passages, it should give us a little pause and be like, huh, that is interesting. In some contexts, they talk about these paths, and sometimes they talk about the people. How do I distinguish between them? And anyway, more questions should kind of come up. So anyway, yeah, good. I like it. So thank you all for that. And you know, continue to think about these things, and you know, we can talk more about it later. So so that was the question. Then anyway, this is sort of just some notes that I had made about you know, there's a difference between the different persons of the three scopes, right? And that is the motivation with which they undertake certain practices, okay? And then the paths of the three scopes are the practices that they do in order to attain those goals. So the shared paths are those practices that would be in common to persons of higher scopes, which is, by the way, why you don't see a path shared with a person of great scope, because that would then imply that there is, you know, a kind of further destination, right? Right. And then I had the question then, a bodhisattva, when they practice abandoning killing, how do we characterize that? Is that a practice shared with a small scope? Well, I see someone nodding their head. I would say a bodhisattva's practice of abandoning killing is not shared with a small scope, because it is motivated by bodhicitta. I'm saying a bodhisattva's practice. A bodhisattva will abandon killing in order to achieve enlightenment for the benefit of all sentient beings. They have uncontrived bodhicitta. Everything they do, you know, is for the attainment of enlightenment. So the practice of abandoning killing is a practice shared with a person of the small scope, because a great scope practitioner and a small scope practitioner both abandon killing, but with a motivation of achieving enlightenment for the benefit of all sentient beings, then to abandon killing, that is not shared with a person of a small scope, because a person of a small scope is not with a motivation to achieve enlightenment for the benefit of all sentient beings, abandoning killing. Are you with me? So this is the two things. And this is why the actual, you know, road and path analogy, it's a little bit doesn't work, because see, what makes that practice for a bodhisattva, abandoning killing, you know, it's the full thing with the motivation and that they're abandoning killing. That's what they're actually, you know, practicing, and that is a you know, then a great scope practice, right? Any action done with a motivation of bodhicitta then becomes a great scope practice. Think about that. And if you have a doubt, remember in the first chapter of you know, Shantideva's Bodhisattva Charivatara, he says that all of the virtues are like a plantain tree, because once they bear fruit, they, the results, perish, right? But the actions done with bodhicitta then become like a wish fulfilling tree that then never, run out of fruit. Okay, so though we characterize normally, let's say, an action of giving as something, that's common with a small scope practitioner, when it's done with an action of bodhicitta, the result of that action does not run out until the full attainment of enlightenment. Therefore, it's a bodhisattva deed. Therefore, it's a practice uncommon to the great scope. Anyway, I see some people still has to knock around in the head there a bit. So, it's good. Think about that. And, this is not the closing the book on this. This is just my thinking, and I'm sharing, the reasoning I'm using. Okay. So anyway, enough on that, but, for sure, this is a big topic. So we should consider it again and again, right? Okay. So in the last session, okay, switching gears, we'll hit the return key a few times. Okay, new paragraph, new chapter, page break. Okay. So now in the last sessions, we then were gave an overview of these three scopes. And then we're saying, okay, these are the practices of a person of small capacity. Okay. And we said impermanence and death, suffering in lower realms, refuge in Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, and the presentation on karma, right? And so now, just to give you a preview of some of the topics that are coming up. So this impermanence and death, there's going to be a whole module on that. Refuge in Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, there's going to be a whole module on that. And karma, there's going to be a whole module on that. Okay. So in this module, in this context, we're not going to go into so much detail in those. But if you remember from the kind of required practices of this module, then there's the meditation on renunciation, and then the meditation on bodhicitta, and then the meditation on emptiness. So those three, renunciation, bodhicitta, and emptiness, are what we now call the three principal aspects of the path. Okay, so we are going to then go into more detail in the next three sessions on one of those three principles in each of the next three sessions. So for the rest of this time, I just want to go through these quite quickly, and then I want to go over some more doubts that came up from the reading. And then, yeah, we can call it a day. So here, these are the kind of shorthand names for these four topics. But now, when we look in the Lamrim outlines, then there's so much more words, right? But then this is just taken from the Liberation of Palm Your Hand outline, where it says, okay, the actual training your mind in the stage of the path shared with a small scope. We have first developing a yearning for a good rebirth, and then second, the teaching the means for happiness in your next rebirth. So, this general structure here, you can actually then see a similar structure in the other two scopes. When we think of the middle scope, then we develop a yearning, not just for a good rebirth, but for, liberation from samsara, right? And then teaching the means for achieving liberation from samsara, right? Or then in the great scope, we will see developing a yearning, for full enlightenment, and then teaching the means to achieve full enlightenment. So this kind of structure is similar across the scopes, where any goal that we have, it's all relative. So we see one situation and we see something else, and we see the relative disadvantages of the one and the relative advantages of the other. So then we desire this one, the better one, and we don't want the lesser one. And then we have to inquire, how do we get the better one, and how do we, you know, avoid the lesser one? So here is the context of, you know, a bad rebirth versus a good rebirth. Okay, so how then do we do that? Then this first one, then recalling that your present rebirth will not last long and that you will die. That is, you know, this first one, impermanence and death. And then second one, thinking about what sort of happiness or suffering you will have in your next rebirth and either the two types of migration, that is suffering of the lower realms. Okay. And then these next two, the refuge and karma, teaching you the means of happiness in your next rebirth. Okay, so now just going into the one level down on these outlines, recalling that your present rebirth will not last long and that you will die. So then this has three major outlines: drawbacks of not remembering death, advantages of remembering death, and then the actual way to remember death. So here the main one is this 9-part meditation on death. And then this 9-part meditation on death actually has 3 root reasons, each of which have 3 further contemplations. So 3 times 3 is 9, right? That's why it's called sometimes it's called the 9-point, you know, death meditation. 3 roots, 3, you know, subpoints. 3 times 3 equals 9. So these are the 3 roots. Root reasons: thinking of the inevitability of death, thinking about the uncertainty of when you will die, and thinking of how nothing can help you when you die except Dharma. And so then the 3 kind of further contemplations of those 3, you know, main points then go to sort of prove the root one. So, you know, since you're going to have a whole you know, module on this, I don't want to sort of steal the thunder, but those of you who have studied Lamrim before, you'll know then the first one, it's, you know, the Lord of Death is coming and nothing can be done to turn him away. The lifespan is constantly deteriorating and nothing can be done to add to it. And then even when we have time, even while we still are alive, we have little time for practice. And then thinking about the uncertainty of when you die, then, you know, many of you would know already, it's, you know, thinking that the beings of this world system, the Zambuling or Jambudvipa, in general have a uncertain lifespan. And then the causes of death are many, and the causes for sustaining life are few, and the body is fragile. So those 3 points, and then thinking of how nothing can help you when you die except Dharma, then, you know, it's your friends can't help, your wealth doesn't help, and you know, your body doesn't help. So anyway, we'll get into that in a next module. Then this next point about thinking about what sort of happiness or suffering you will have in your next rebirth in either of the 2 types of migration. So here, you know, when we say 2 types of migration, it is migration of the higher rebirths or the lower rebirths. And then you'll sometimes see the 6 types of migration. So then the 2 types become 6 because there are 3 higher, you know, rebirths, 3 types of higher rebirth and 3 types of lower rebirth. So in this context, we now think of the 3 types of lower rebirth: the suffering of the hells, suffering of the hungry ghosts or the pretas, and the thinking of the suffering of the animals. So yeah, that is there. And then next, you know, the thinking of the means to attain a good rebirth, you know, then has the taking refuge, the holy gateway of entering the teachings. And there, here again, we have another whole module on this. Then, you know, there we're going to talk about the causes on which one's taking refuge depends, what to take refuge in, the measure of having taken refuge, the benefits of taking refuge, and advice after one has taken refuge. So this is all to come. We had mentioned, because we recited at the beginning of the sessions, the refuge verse. So then we mentioned that, you know, the causes are, they normally talk about fear and faith, what to take refuge in, the 3 jewels, And then, these other ones, yeah, they, again, not to steal the thunder from a later module, but that's anyway, this is, presenting the path. We're going to be just giving a brief overview, and then we can, go into more detail later. And then the last sort of point in the small scope, or the path shared with the small scope, is developing believing faith in the law of cause and effect, the root of all health and happiness. And so there, in that context, we have thinking about the cause and effect in general, thinking about some of the specifics, and after thinking about these things, the way to modify your behavior. Okay. So, you're now doing the reading, right? And so in both the day one of liberation, the palm of your hand, and now I also had you read Illuminating the Path to Enlightenment, this teaching done by His Holiness, which, by the way, I hope all of you have done, right? So then you can see, and why I chose that reading, hopefully you'll have a lot of, oh wow, I know what His Holiness is talking about, because a lot of those very things that we covered in class, which maybe some of you are like, man, why is this guy going into so much detail? But those are the very things that when you later attend a teaching from His Holiness, he's going to go through those things about the two great trailblazers, Nagarjuna and Asanga, the various, the profound view lineage, the extensive deed lineage, all these kinds of things. That teaching, by the way, it wasn't for monks in the monastery. That teaching was given in, well, LA, right, or Long Beach, which we can go down the Pacific Coast Highway to that place, right? But anyway, so that was for people, like yourselves, not monks, not monastics, but people who are engaged in the lay life. And when His Holiness gives teaching on this text, then he talks about those topics, these things. So what do you want me to do, right? Okay. Anyway, now next point, I wanted to talk about terminology and doubts that came up in the reading. So again, Matthew, maybe you weren't here for all the earlier sessions, but I gave some advice that one of the abbots of Kopan Monastery, Lama Lundrup, some advice that he gave to Tenzin Lexok, the other monk that were co-teaching the Discovering Buddhism for Ocean of Compassion Center. But he told Tenzin Lexok that when you go through these texts, make sure that you understand every word. And so I like that bit of advice very much. There's a saying that you should be careful who you choose as your teacher, because you're going to end up like them, right? So that is on a good way, right? If your teacher has good qualities, you'll come to emulate those. So let's focus on that side first, okay? So here now, it's not just that I'm assigning you reading as punishment, and then I'm like, ha 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 ha. They have to read 100 pages, right? But I'm also, doing this reading myself, and it's very interesting because I've read the Liberation of the Palm of Your Hand, yeah, many times by now. But it's one of these books where every time you go through it, you pick up on different things. And it's one of those classics, right? So here we have this this passage from page 15 in the blue translation. So it says, but is even this sufficient? Again, it is not. If you achieve the state of a Shravaka or Pratyeka Buddha, Arhat for your own sake, you have not even fulfilled your own needs and have done virtually nothing for the sake of others, this is because you have not yet abandoned some of the things you ought, such as the obscurations to omniscience and the 4 causes of ignorance. Okay, so this was the reading from a few weeks ago, and it's interesting because then no one asked, "Hey, what are these 4 causes of ignorance?" So, if I were to ask you, what are the 4 causes of ignorance? Then I get, oh, what? Okay, so no problem. Again, we're learning, and in some cases, right, we have to learn how to learn. That's okay. So again, remember, this is not like you're reading these books and it's like reading a Harry Potter novel where you're trying to maybe finish it all 800 pages in one afternoon, right? But every maybe page kind of pausing, every paragraph pausing and asking, okay, what is the author saying here? Are there any kind of terminology that I don't know? And sort of be able to, have that level of understanding. So here, then many of you, then if you came to this and you said, oh, 4 causes of ignorance, what is that? Then I'll tell you, it's one of the things you can do, right? Google is our friend. And so one thing I would advise all of you to do, okay, when there's terminology like this, now there's a lot of information online and not all of it is maybe trustworthy, okay? But one thing you can do is you can Google or Ecosia or whatever, right? 4 causes of ignorance, Lama Zopa Rinpoche, or FPMT, okay, something like this. So you can maybe get a kind of response from the FPMT, who has good standards in sharing good information. And did anyone do that? If you had done that, then you'd be amazed, because you would have found there's this ongoing series of teachings that Lama Zopa Rinpoche is giving. And look at that, the 4 causes of unknowing. Okay, so see, this is it's good. You find something you don't know, you do your own research, and then this kind of falls in your lap, and you'll see, oh wow, Lama Zopa Rinpoche, he gave a whole talk about this. Isn't that amazing? Okay, and then you would then see there's a video, and then he'll kind of talks about this. He is giving the motivation for the teachings, and then in talking about the motivation for the teachings, then he's saying this thing, right, that arhats, if you're not enlightened, liberated, or ceased the gross defilements, the disturbing thought obscurations, shidup, these are Tibetan phrases, the obscurations to a fully knowing mind, if you haven't totally ceased that, you haven't removed the mishe gyushi, the 4 causes of unknowing. You haven't removed that. Now here, even in here, we have the good work of Venerable Joan, who then puts it in a footnote, the 4 causes of unknowing, as explained by His Holiness the First Dalai Lama and Gyendun Drup, in clarifying the path to liberation. This is a text on the Abhidharma Kosha. So there are these 4 causes of unknowing. Unknowing due to the profound and subtle qualities of the Buddha, unknowing due to a very remote place, and so forth. So anyway, I thought to, just mention this, one, to sort of show that, when we come across things that maybe we don't know, we can sometimes find them very well explained by doing a bit of research. But then two, even if we get to this, then it's like, okay, maybe I still don't know what it is. So here, this first one, unknowing due to the profound and subtle qualities of the Buddha, right? So, the very like profound means the so amazing qualities of a Buddha, it's only when you achieve that state can you fully understand and appreciate what those qualities are, right? So at one point, Shariputra was asked, can you fully understand and know all the qualities of the Buddha? And Shariputra says no, right? So there is one thing, although there is the clairvoyance within the Buddhist cosmology, and clairvoyance does exist, the ability to see other people's minds exists. There is this kind of view that one can only see the level of mind equal to and below one's own level, right? So above that, it's kind of above your pay grade, right? And you don't have, security clearance, that kind of thing. So even now, when we talk about the 10 Bodhisattva levels, right? So Bodhisattvas say on the fifth ground, they can see the minds of the beings on sort of lower levels. But when they start talking about, 7th, 8th, 9th, higher level Bodhisattvas, they can't, penetrate. They can't understand those qualities. So then the unknowing due to a very remote place, then, Moggallana didn't know that his mother had been reborn. So Moggallana, by the way, is a Shravaka Arhat, right? So he didn't know that his mother had been reborn in the northern direction in the world, having light rays. Anyway, there's this story from the sutras, okay? And then unknowing due to a very remote time. For example, when Shariputra, not knowing that the household or glorious rebirth had roots of virtue partially concordant with liberation, did not ordain him. So this is that very famous story that comes up, right? That older gentleman, his name in Tibetan is Pelkye. Here they translate it as glorious rebirth. Then he was the old man that was, I read in one commentary, he was 100 years old, okay? And anyway, his family were abusing him and, making fun of him for being old, engaging in, ageism, right? And he finally was fed up, went to Shariputra at the monastery, asked to be ordained, but then Shariputra, didn't see that he had roots of virtue partially concordant with liberation, which means, the roots of virtue that would, be suitable for someone to achieve liberation. And therefore Shariputra turned him away. And then, he threw himself in the river. This old man threw himself in the river. The Buddha came and saved him. And then, said this statement that, basically that, Shariputra hadn't abandoned these causes of unknowing, but I have as the Buddha. Therefore, I do see the roots of virtue that you have from a very, very long time ago when you were a fly who did a circumambulation of a stupa. Anyway, that story comes up again and again. And then this unknowing, the fourth one, unknowing due to the infinite divisions of the aspects. So this is not knowing the particularities of the constituents, migrations, places of rebirth, and so forth, which are difficult to realize. For example, not knowing the causes of the various colors of the eye of a peacock's feather, and so forth. Okay. So this is one of the famous examples in the Indo-Tibetan tradition, because there was in ancient Indian philosophical tenet system, the Travakas, who held that things arise causelessly, and the example that they use is the colors of the eye of a peacock feather. They say that's not caused, That's just, it is what it is, right? But, with some of these things, yeah, there are many different causes and conditions that have to come together. And because of that, then, many of us, we can't fathom all of that. So, but rather than saying those don't exist, then, the Buddha with the omniscient mind, right, can know all these infinite and the varied causes and conditions for certain things to come about. Okay. So hold on. I'm going to switch here. Okay. So what all of this is getting to, okay, we have to, keep in mind the big picture. Remember, one of the greatnesses of Lam Rim is that we come to see that all of the teachings are actually instructions for practice, okay? So some of it's like, oh my gosh, we have all these divisions, we have all this complicated philosophical vocabulary, but what is the main point that's being made here, right? Is even this sufficient? So what is this? This, in this context, right, is the mere attainment of, liberation from samsara. Okay, so this comes up in the context of showing why we need to not just be satisfied with the motivation of a middle scope practitioner, but why we need to, aspire further to the, great scope. Okay, and that's because there is a difference in the realization between the Buddhas and the Arhats who've attained mere liberation from samsara. So this again, maybe some of you, it came up actually in one of the previous sessions. Okay, well, I hear these terms coming, full enlightenment, nirvana, liberation. What does all this mean? Okay, so now here we come, right? So these so-called Hinayana Arhats means the Shravaka, otherwise known as the hearer, and Pratyekya Buddha, okay, solitary realizer Arhats, okay, and the complete Buddhas. Okay, so first, what do they have in common? So what they have in common is they both have abandoned the afflictions, means, these afflictive emotions, anger, jealousy, pride, attachment, so forth. And the most important, the ignorance grasping on to the false notion of the self, and their seeds. So here, seeds of afflictions means the potential for them to arise again in the future. Okay, so here, to give an example, at this point, right, at this point in the session, I'm not angry, right? But so there's no manifest anger, but the seeds of anger are still there in my continuum. I haven't abandoned them yet. So then in the future, when I meet with certain causes and conditions, then, anger can arise uncontrollably, well, with very little control on my part, because the seeds or the potential for them to arise are still there. So in order to achieve liberation, both the manifest afflictions and the seeds or the potential for them to arise again in the future need to be abandoned. Okay? So both the Arhats and the full, complete enlightened Buddhas have liberated themselves from that. They've abandoned those. Okay, but remember, just as the great scope practitioners, right? The Buddhas, they go above and beyond, right? The other scopes. So this is the last part of the journey. This is the Santa Barbara to LA, right? The Buddhas have abandoned the obscurations to omniscience. Okay, so now here, there's two different ways that this is talked about. Okay, the second way, right, the four causes of unknowing, this is, again, I mentioned, this is how it's presented in the Abhidharma. So even the Abhidharma, actually, it was written for the Vaibhashika tenet system, right? So this actually is a kind of, in terms of philosophical tenet system, it's a lower tenet system. So in the lower tenet systems, they talk about this four causes of unknowing, but they still agree that the level of realization that a Hinayana Arhat and the Buddha had, they agree there's a difference. Those tenet systems, they talk about the difference is the Buddha has abandoned these 4 causes of unknowing. Okay. Now these obscurations to omniscience, then this is what is more talked about in the Mahayana tenet systems, the Mahayana text. Okay. And so these, sometimes you'll see it referred to as cognitive obscurations, are the subtle stains of ignorance of grasping to the self. And what then this does, that obscures the mind to see directly both levels of truth, means the conventional and ultimate truths simultaneously with one mind. Okay. So here, the point, one other way this is described is, okay, what then are we talking about seeing these 2 levels of truth simultaneously? All right. So until you achieve enlightenment, then the sentient beings, they can only see either the conventional level of truth directly or the ultimate level of truth directly. Okay. Now we talked about this before, but when one is able to see ultimate truth, means emptiness directly, one then becomes an Arya being, right? So that's another terminology that you'll see. An Arya being is able to see the ultimate truth directly. So we, right, or I should say I don't see emptiness. I don't realize emptiness either directly, of course not, or even the other way of realizing something is through inference, right? So inference being a kind of conceptual thought, right? A conceptual realization where we use reasoning to arrive at a certain conclusion, right? And so the most common example of this, and we'll get to this in a couple of minutes, but realizing on a faraway mountain pass the existence of fire due to having seen smoke, right? We don't see the fire directly, we only see the smoke. But knowing the relationship between fire and smoke, we can infer the fire. So we realize fire, but we don't realize it directly because fire isn't appearing to us, okay? So that's the difference basically between a conceptual realization and a direct realization. The direct realization has to appear like, the things appearing to our own eyes, right? These are, the cup appears to my eye consciousness. I realize it directly because it appears. Okay. So, now, ordinary beings means beings who don't have a direct realization of emptiness, right? They can only see the conventional truth directly. We see all these things, books, cups, tables, these are all on the level of conventional truth. Now, they can realize the ultimate level of truth through through a conceptual consciousness. But now these Arya beings, they can realize the ultimate level of truth directly. This is in meditative equipoise, right? So when they meditate on emptiness, at some point it appears to them as if, just like the cup appears to my eye consciousness. Okay. But at the time when this ultimate level of truth, emptiness, is appearing, right, then all the conventional phenomena don't appear. So only the appearance they have is that of emptiness, which is this, we call it a non-affirming negation. It just negates the true existence of phenomena, right? So what appears is this lack of true existence. Okay, that's it. So they realize that directly, but at that point, all the other conventional phenomena don't appear, which is why you'll see in the text, this is called the space-like, meditative equipoise. It's like space because just like space, it's just kind of empty like this. It's an analogy again. Space-like meditative equipoise. Then the illusion-like post-meditative realization. When they arise from that meditation, then all the things, the books, tables, chairs, they appear again. At that point, they're not directly realizing emptiness. They're directly realizing the conventional truth again, right? So they then alternate between those two levels of direct realization of the convention and ultimate. But the Buddha, in one mind at one time, having removed these obscurations to omniscience, then can see both levels of truth simultaneously, one mind, one time. Okay. Now, the point of all this is that, okay, when we come back to this, if you achieve the state of a hero or practice a Buddha, Arhat, for your own sake, you have not even fulfilled your own needs. Now, actually, okay, I'm going to be honest, I'm not being critical, but sometimes, and we'll see this in a couple of minutes too, I go back then and I read the Tibetan, and sometimes it's a little bit, how should we say? Maybe the translation can use a bit of work. Yeah, can I say that? So here, you see, not even fulfill their own needs. Okay, what does that mean? These people, who've attained Shravaka and Pratyeka Buddha Arhat, they're liberated from samsara. So how can we say they have not fulfilled your own needs? Don't we all need samsara? And liberation? And then done virtually nothing for the sake of others. Okay, so here, you should understand this. Have we talked about the so-called four bodies of the Buddha, right? The four kayas? Maybe not. But anyway, we can think, we did talk about the two collections of merit and transcendental wisdom. And we talked about those two collections then become the cause of the two bodies of the Buddha. There's the form body of the Buddha, the Rupakaya, and the truth body of the Buddha, or the Dharmakaya. The collection of merit becomes the cause of the truth of the form body of the Buddha, and the collection of transcendental wisdom is the cause of the Dharmakaya, or the truth body of the Buddha. So the truth body of the Buddha is the omniscient mind of the Buddha, and the complete abandonment, right? The complete cessation of the obscurations to omniscience. Okay. So that one is known as the body of one's own purpose. Okay. So now here, this word body, kaya, it's again something that's a little bit confusing. So don't think of it as like a physical body, right? It's not like a body, but rather we have this in English, body of water, right? What is a body of water? But it's a place where a lot of water is kind of collected and comes together. So these bodies of the Buddha, it's not a physical body, but rather it's a way of collecting. It's a collection of good qualities. So the qualities of having abandoned even the subtle obscurations to omniscience, and the qualities of the omniscient mind that sees all phenomena directly, that is what's called the body for one's own purpose. Okay, so here when it says you haven't fulfilled your own needs, it means you haven't there's a phrase in the Tibetan, Yonsu Zokpa, completely. So that's missing here. You haven't completely fulfilled or completed, and here needs, I would say, there's this word dun, purpose, goal. There's different ways to say, but what this means in this context is you haven't, fully completed, fully perfected your own purpose, which means you haven't achieved the Dharmakaya. Okay. And therefore, since you haven't achieved that, there's still more that you can do. Okay. So that's the point here. And then done virtually nothing for the sake of others. Again, let me look at the Tibetan again. This is here it says Shen Dunyang Ni Sewa La Mete. Okay, so Nin Sewa has a connotation, sometimes it's translated as like partial. Okay, so I wouldn't say you have done virtually nothing for the sake of others, but you know, the amount that you can do for others is only partial, right? So we can't say that, you know, these arhats do virtually nothing for the sake of others. No way. We see you know, these arhats, even the great disciples of the Buddha, you know, Shariputra, he was the abbot of the monastery. He led so many beings to, you know, liberation, right? So I don't like this saying done virtually nothing for the sake of others, but, you know, one's ability to work for others is only partial. Okay. And why is that? Why are you only able to work in a kind of partial, incomplete way for the benefit of others? Because you haven't abandoned, you know, some of the things you ought. That, by the way, is referring to the first part. You haven't completely fulfilled your own purpose, right? And then why can't you, you know, work more than just a partial way for others? Because you haven't abandoned those causes of ignorance. Then we see, right, those situations. Shariputra, he made a mistake. He turned away that, you know, that old man Pelke, right? He said, no, you can't get ordained. I don't see the, you know, cause of liberation in you. So because of that, right, he couldn't. He made a mistake. He couldn't work perfectly for his benefit. You know, later when the Buddha did ordain him, you know, he actually attained liberation in that life, right? So if it just were, you know, Shariputra there, that man would have never been ordained. He never would have attained liberation in that life. Okay. So this is the point. There's this difference in realization between the Buddhas and Arhats. Then when we see, okay, yeah, why are they, what is the difference? Okay, then there's this presentation of different obscurations, but the main point is, okay, why do I need to achieve enlightenment? Why is the mere attainment of liberation not enough for me? And then this is why I'm, you know, emphasizing at the beginning of every session, only when we achieve the state of complete enlightenment will we have all of the skills, all of the qualities, all of the knowledge to lead sentient beings in the most effective way to liberation and enlightenment. Okay. Now, the flip side of that is, then don't, you know, criticize the arhats, right? They do still work for the benefit of others, but they do it in this, you know, they can only do it in a partial way because, you know, they're not omniscient. That's the point. Okay. So let's see. Okay, good. Then we have this other passage from the Liberation in the Palm of Your Hand here on page 13 in the blue book, if you know, you want to follow along. For example, Arya Nagarjuna says in his precious garland, from non-virtue comes all suffering, and likewise the lower realms. From virtue comes all upper realms and all happy rebirths. So this is a very nice passage. Okay. But then we have this from, well, this translation. Okay. We cannot be certain, even by means of direct valid cognition, of such things as where we will go in our future rebirths. Nevertheless, our teacher correctly perceived this extremely obscure object of valid cognition and taught on it without error. Thus, we can be certain only by using Buddha's valid scriptures for an inference based on trust. Okay. To be honest, I was expecting a question about this passage from one of you. Now, just let this sink in a little bit. Interesting. What does this mean? Okay, so first thing that pops out at me, even by means of direct valid cognition, okay, even by means of direct valid cognition. So very interesting, okay? So here, again, knowing every word. So here, it's not a thing where, okay, I don't know what even means, but it's interesting because this mode of speaking, it has two ways, right? Two ways that we do. So like, for example, if you said, like for example, His Holiness gave me a mala, right? And then you're like, oh, wow, you know, can I have that? And then I would say, you know, I wouldn't give this to you even for $1 million, right? Right, that's one way where we use this word even. It's showing something kind of higher than the high, right? And then we have another way, it's kind of lower than the low, right? Oh, Namjong, have you had breakfast today? And then I say, oh, you know, I haven't even had one biscuit. I haven't even had my morning coffee. Something like this, right? So that means kind of lower than the low, right? Generally speaking, even. So in this context, what are we talking about? Even by means of valid cognition, we cannot be certain, even by means of direct valid cognition, of such things as where we will go in our future rebirths. So what does the even mean? So just give pause, because here, okay, so that's one thing. We'll resolve that in a second. Then we have more terminology. Nevertheless, our teacher correctly perceived this extremely obscure object of valid cognition. Okay, what does that mean? And then inference based on trust. Oh man. Okay, some more terminology here. So I want to go through this terminology, and then we'll go back and try to figure out what the whole thing means. Okay. So here, you'll see this again and again, I hope. But we have existent phenomena. They're divided into different categories according to how they are realized. Okay. So first thing we should know, so the very definition of what an existent phenomena is to be an object of valid cognition. Okay. So again, we got to lay the groundwork with the terminology. So what that means is, if something exists, it must be an object of valid cognition, means realized by an object, by a valid cognition. Okay. And if something is realized by a valid cognition, it must exist. Okay, so now, what is a valid cognition? So valid cognition is a type of mind that we say is incontrovertible with respect to its object. So every mind has an object. Okay. So let's take, for example, you know, I have an eye consciousness that realizes the cup in my hand, right? Incontrovertible means that then if anyone comes to me and then says, no, that's not a cup, whatever kind of reasoning, whatever they try to say to me, I'll be unshakable. You can't refute this. You know, there is a cup. What are you talking about? I'm not crazy, you're crazy, right? So like this, okay? So that's what it means. You know, valid cognition means incontrovertible, means its object must exist, right? And vice versa. If something exists, it must be realized by valid cognition. So that doesn't mean that then everyone has to realize it, right? But it must be realized by a valid cognition. Okay. So then we have these different types of existent phenomena that are then described about how they're realized. So this we talked about before. Manifest phenomena, they're realized, directly. Okay. That means the flip side. It's not an object that an ordinary being must realize independence upon a sign or a reason. Okay. Means by a conceptual consciousness. So then we have the obscure phenomena. We have manifest and obscure or hidden phenomena. These are the things that ordinary beings, remember, ordinary beings are those who haven't realized emptiness directly. They must realize those definitively, independence upon a sign or a reason, means conceptual. Okay. So now these obscure or hidden phenomena then again have two divisions. Slightly obscure phenomena which an ordinary being must definitely realize initially, independence upon a sign by the power of a fact. Oh man. So what does this mean? Okay. Sign means reason. Power of the fact is like we had that example of the realizing the fire on a faraway mountain pass, right? How does that work actually? Well, we see the smoke. We know the relationship between smoke and fire. Okay, so that's the power of the fact. It's not because the next one, right? A sign upon belief. Here we're going to say that depends on someone else's testimony. Okay, it's not because the Buddha said so, or someone told me so. It's because there is a factual basis in the relationship between smoke and fire. Therefore, through smoke, we can infer fire. So those things are slightly obscure. Okay. Then the extremely obscure objects of valid cognition are the phenomena which an ordinary being must definitely realize initially, independence upon a sign of belief. Okay. So here again, what this means then is reason of belief means we believe in someone else's testimony. Okay. So for example, when you were born, this is an extremely obscure object of valid cognition. When were you born? Right? We can't realize that ourselves. And there's no sort of fact of the matter like smoke and fire where we can say, I was born on whatever day. We have to rely on the testimony of someone else, our mother, or whoever, the doctor, who says you're born on whatever day, right? So this is what it means. A sign of belief is just a way of saying, a reason that we believe someone else's testimony. Okay. So those are these categories of phenomena. Now let's go back. So then the teacher correctly perceived this extremely obscure object of valid cognition and taught it without error. Thus, we can be certain only by using the Buddha's valid scriptures for an inference based on trust. Okay. So now this is interesting here. Okay. Now we're getting more pieces of the puzzle. Now we know what an extremely obscure object of valid cognition is. It's one that we can only realize, right? Us ordinary beings, we can only realize based on someone else's, testimony, right? So now, what is the extremely obscure object of valid cognition in this context? Okay, in the previous sentence, it says, we cannot be certain where we will go in our future rebirth. Okay, right? But it's coming after this quotation by Nagarjuna, from non-virtue comes suffering and likewise all lower realms. Okay. So, now there's two options then. The extremely obscure object of valid cognition in this context could be either where, me, like Tenzin Namjong, where I'm going to be reborn in the future, okay, where I am going to be reborn in my next life. Or it can be this general principle, from non-virtue comes rebirth in the lower realm, right? Okay, so let's think about that, okay? Now, but while that's kind of marinating, right? Let's go back to this even by means of direct valid cognition, okay? So where I'm going to be reborn in my next life, even by means of direct valid cognition, I cannot be certain. Now, what does that mean? Is that a higher than the high or lower than the low? Right? It's weird, because we see here the only one that can realize where I'm going in my next rebirth is a Buddha, right? It's an extremely obscure object of valid cognition. So me as an ordinary being, I have to realize that, definitely realize initially independence on a sign of belief, right? So it's weird, even by means of direct valid cognition. So it can't be higher than the high, but it's also not lower than the low, because of course I can't realize it by direct valid cognition. Do you understand why this is phrased in a strange manner? Okay, so anyway, think about that. We're a little bit running out of time. So I'll just say this. The issue and the problem is, in the Tibetan, there's this, it's called a kyangdra, kyang, right? Where it can either mean like this, even, or although, even though. It's the same word, but depending on the context, it means two different things. So here, again, we can write a letter to the editor, but I think it should be even though, okay? So even though we cannot be certain, right, by means of valid cognition, where we're going to be reborn in our rebirths, right? The Buddha, he taught these extremely obscure objects of valid cognition and taught it. Therefore, using inference based on trust of his testimony, we can be certain. Okay, but then the question still is, certain about what? Certain about where we are going to go in our future rebirth? So did the Buddha say, in any of the sutras, okay, now Tenzin Namjong, right? In whatever, in the 21st century, after he, is a monk in Seta, is now going to be reborn as a whatever. Did he teach that? If so, where? I don't see. Okay, so then it seems to suggest that it's actually referring to this general principle, that from non-virtue comes suffering and likewise the lower realm, that from negative actions come lower rebirths and from positive actions come higher rebirths. So is that general principle of karma an extremely hidden phenomena? Very, very interesting. It's good. We're out of time. These are things that yeah, I don't want to just gloss over too quickly, but it's very, very interesting. If you don't understand yet, right? Now then the question comes, right? This general principle of karma. Oh, that's the extremely hidden phenomena. Well, don't we have texts from other traditions that say abandon non-virtue and then you'll be reborn in heaven? Means basically, getting a good future rebirth, right? So there are texts from other traditions that actually do they show the path of the small scope? Okay, that's one thing. Then this other thing, right? Well, weren't we talking about these 4 causes of unknowing, right? And then, you know, as we said before, the very subtle workings of karma. Oh, that's the one where, you know, there is that fire at the wedding reception, and then 49 people were able to escape, and 49 people were burned to death and 1 were able to escape. And then the Buddha said, oh, it's because in such and such a life, then, you know, there's this situation. So those subtle workings of karma that understand, okay, from this particular deed done in this life, now you're experiencing this particular suffering. Isn't that the one that is, you know, extremely hidden? But this general principle of, you know, from non-virtue comes suffering in all lower realms. Isn't that something that can be, you know, realized? Yeah, by non-Buddhas. So anyway, we're out of time, and I see one hand is raised. But the question and what we need to then analyze is here: what is that extremely obscure object of valid cognition? Is it the mere, you know, principle of karma that from negativity comes suffering, or is it these particular, you know, this particular action done in this life then leads to this particular experience that you're having today? Okay, sorry. Eve, you have your hand up?
Yeah, I'm not sure if I understood this correctly. Did you want us to send you our questions as we do our readings? Like, so that you know what kind of questions come up? And if so, where would you like them sent?
Yeah, so, you know, if you have questions, and by the way, no one gave me a private message with the answer. Anyway, but if you have questions, yeah, by all means, you can send them. How we can do that? Well, Mary Ellen, do you want to be the point person for that? Is that okay? So yeah, that's
Yes, that's fine. Yeah.
okay.
I didn't realize you wanted it in the private message.
No, it's okay. It's okay. It's okay. We're easygoing. Okay. Anyway, anything else right now? Otherwise, we can, you know, dedicate and get going. Okay, Anne.
I had a question about the reading. It doesn't have to be answered at this time, and so I could send it to Mary Ellen. If since time would. Okay.
Yeah. Well, why don't you can ask now. It's okay. Yeah.
Okay. So from Illuminating the Path, page 75. I wasn't going to ask this in class, but since we just went into valid cognition, there is a place on page 75. If we pursue this process of constantly engaging our mind with the object, in this case, the nature of reality, we reach the point where we have not only intellectual inferential knowledge of the object, but also a kind of experiential knowledge at this initial stage. So he goes on to describe this simulated experiential knowledge and then spontaneous non-simulated experiential knowledge. I'm guessing this might be direct valid cognition of sorts, but I've never heard these terms: simulated experiential knowledge and spontaneous non-simulated experiential knowledge.
Right.
75.
Okay, I don't have that text with me, but I do have the PDF. Anyway, okay, I will have to check. So I'll get back to you next week. I want to, you know, read the full context. But what you're thinking, you know, is a good hypothesis. I wonder if it could also mean, you know, the transition from a kind of contrived bodhicitta to the actual spontaneous bodhicitta. So those are the two candidates, what it could mean. But yeah, it could also mean the conceptual knower going to the direct perceiver. Okay.
Okay.
I'll read the context and you know, then we can see which is better fit. Okay. So thank you very much for your hard work. And let's go back to the dedication. Man, I have too many windows open. So anyway, I can't do the script, the share. But anyway, we can dedicate, right? So due to these merits, I dedicate these merits for the benefit of all sentient beings, and in particular, for the pure teachings of Losang Drakpa, means Lama Tsongkhapa, to flourish. I also dedicate for the long lives of the spiritual friends, particularly His Holiness Dalai Lama and Lama Zopa Rinpoche, and all their holy wishes be spontaneously fulfilled. Then we also dedicate for the development of the mind of bodhicitta in our own minds and in the minds of all sentient beings without even a second's delay. And then having generated bodhicitta, may all sentient beings quickly achieve the state of complete enlightenment. Okay, so thank you very much. And yeah, a little bit hard this week, but you know, that's why we have the video. You can you know, listen to it again, think about these points, and that point I brought up at the end, you know, is a big topic. Okay, so don't worry about it. We debate that point a lot, even into the, you know, all the years throughout the Geshe studies debate, and you know, it's talked about in many texts. Pramanavartika, at the end of the first chapter, talks about this very thing. So yeah, when I just to give you a little hint, when I answer in the way that I think, and people then debate me, I can't maintain the position. They always are able to poke it and get me to contradict myself. Nonetheless, I'm quite stubborn about it, and I'm still answering in the way that I answer. So anyway, okay. So let's think about that more and more. Okay, thanks very much, and we'll see you next week. Oh, and yeah, we'll send out an email soon about next week's homework. I think it's just going to be the next part of Illuminating the Path, and then that other reading by Lama Yeshe, The Essence of Tibetan Buddhism. There's going to be up to the part on renunciation, because next week we're going to talk about renunciation. So maybe 2 more days, 2 more days of His Holiness teaching in that book, and then the section in Lama Yeshe's book about renunciation. Anyway, we'll get you those exact page numbers. Okay. All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Venerable Namjong.
Thank you.
So much.
Thank you.